This is Parenting for the Everyday, a podcast dedicated to meeting parents in the trenches of parenthood. We explore how our faith fits into our parenting. With the help of our guests, we are seeking practical tips on how the gospel can speak into our day-to-day parenting. From the easy stuff to the hard stuff, we want to talk about it all.
This is Parenting for the Everyday. I'm Holly Dyke-Andrew.
And I'm Becca Alvarez.
And on today's episode, we are talking about the Sabbath. And right off the bat, you might be thinking, that's weird. This is not an episode for me. I'm thinking that a little bit here too. But no, I think it'll be a good topic to talk about as Christian parents. It's a phrase that we hear, but I don't know that any of us know what it really means and how to do this well as a family. So we have Ken Probucky in the studio with us. He's one of the pastors on staff at CCC. And we have tasked him with kind of breaking this down for us and helping us be more intentional in this area.
Yeah, well, hello. Thanks for having me and for making me face my own hypocrisy in this area. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
Well, let's start pretty easy, but maybe not as easy as you would think, because when I first heard that we were doing the Sabbath, I thought that meant we were doing the Passover, which is very much different than what the Sabbath is. So Ken, tell us, what is the Sabbath?
Yeah, so let's start by framing what it is against the idea of work, because it's hard to understand Sabbath without understanding work. So let's just start here. Work is good. Work is good. Work is God ordained. It's God commanded. So if you look at Genesis 2, God is commanding us to work the land, to work the garden. And Paul says in Colossians 3 that we ought to work. And so work ethic is good and right. And there are some admonitions, particularly in the New Testament, against laziness and apathy, right? So work is good. Let's start there. But the Sabbath is designed to be a rest from the rhythm of work. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. But let's just get some things out of the way that the Sabbath isn't. I think that would be good. Because as I was working through this, again, talking about my own feeling convicted in this area, the Sabbath is not about vegging out. It's not about catching up on your favorite show on Netflix. It's not about completely unplugging from people for the purpose of having me time. It is not those things. When we talk about rest from work, I'm going to probably say this a couple of times, rest from work and rest from works, which we'll unpack in a little bit. We're talking about the Sabbath as a God-ordained and a God model, because God also rested in the rhythm of creation, 6 days of work, putting this whole world together, resting on the seventh day. God ordained, God modeled way of resting from work to turn our attention, to turn our focus back to God.
Yeah. Whew, that's good. We're going to get into it today. Let's even go back a little bit further and why is this a topic we're talking about? The Sabbath is actually one of the 10 Commandments, right? Keeping the Sabbath is in there, and it can be easy to think through, or it can be easy to think, oh, that one doesn't apply anymore. What does that even mean? Because you see like one of the commandments of do not kill, great. Check. I am not doing that one, so that's great. But keeping the Sabbath, it doesn't seem to be as easy, and partially it's because I don't fully understand what that means is to do it myself, to then be able to do it well for my family. So let's even go back, say, hey, is this still relevant? It's one of the 10 Commandments. Is it still relevant, and why do we care about it?
Yeah, and at the risk of borrowing trouble for future podcasts, I think the commandment against murder is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah,
but
it is.
That's for maybe another day. But yes, absolutely, the fourth commandment, keep the Sabbath. If you look at the 10 Commandments, the structure of them, really the first 4 commandments are about loving God, and then the latter 6 are about loving others. And so got to understand that the command to keep the Sabbath, to set it aside as holy, as set apart for God, that's a love God commandment. It's a love God commandment. It was actually given to us for our good. In Mark 2, Jesus said that the Sabbath was created for man, right? It is for us. But it is a love God commandment that is really about, as I said, turning our attention and focus back to God. And it's not framed as a thou shalt not, which is the rhythm of the following commandments. But if we were to frame it as a thou shalt not, it is really God saying, thou shalt not make yourself God. Thou shalt not try to take everything into your own hands, try to exercise complete control, dominion. It's crazy to think this, but I think that it's sobering to consider that the Sabbath is, as much as anything, about turning away from self-idolatry. That the rhythm of rest, let's just sit on that for a second.
Ooh, that stings a little.
That when we are commanded by God to set it aside, to rest in who God is and what he has done, and again, we're going to talk more about the finished work of Jesus because that's inextricably linked to the idea of observing the Sabbath, that it is taking the attention off of ourselves in a world that increasingly tells us, and let's be honest, we have that voice in our head too that tells us as parents, as employees, whatever role we play, do more, earn more, work harder, that we are actually self-consumed in that way. And we believe, the lie we've been told, the lie we tell ourselves, is that if we do more, if we work harder, we will get the things that we want, we will get the things that we need. And this is dangerous for two reasons. One generally, and then one as directly applicable to what we're doing here today on this podcast. First of all, it's a lie. It's a lie that no amount of work can sufficiently protect us or insulate us from the day-to-day of this life. Curveballs are going to happen. We can't control things the way we think we can or the way that we want to. That's just a reality. But number two, as parents, what's really scary about this is that if we don't take the time to rest and refocus on God, his provision, what he's done for us, that what we're actually modeling to our kids is something deeply unhealthy. That when we think we're modeling healthy work ethic, we might actually be modeling self-idolatry.
I don't love that.
Ooh.
No, I don't love that either.
I don't love that.
Yeah.
This might be jumping a little bit ahead, but as you're speaking and the different words that you're using of a rest from work, what about for people that are stay-at-home parents? Like I'm a stay-at-home mom, so my work is with my kids, and that doesn't really have
you don't get a
rest.
day off.
That doesn't.
That? Oh.
No, typically, so far, no. In my 3 years, no. But so, what does that look like if you are a stay-at-home parent and that is the bulk of kind of your work? What does Sabbath look like for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. In doing my research for this podcast, came across a great article on the Gospel Coalition website that's entitled, I think, "The Sabbath is for Busy Moms Too." And so I found that on point for me as a dad, not just for moms, but as a dad, but particularly for working for stay-at-home moms. It's a 24/7 sort of job. You can't just look at your kid crying in the middle of the night and say, "Sorry,
not today.
I'm resting."
It's the Sabbath. Yeah, we're not doing this.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what we can do is understand, and what we can instill in our kids are healthy rhythms of rest that are practical and that can make sense for us and that are super healthy. So if we were to zoom out for a moment, let's not visit the 3 a.m. puking kid example right now, okay? You got to do what you got to do. But when we look at Sunday, for instance, and it doesn't have to be Sunday, by the way, and I think we might be covering that a little later on, but the idea of corporate worship, rejuvenating our souls through worship, through prayer, through the beauty of the local gathering is really important. There is rest to be found there, because when you are gathering together as a local body, you are, we hope, we should be, focusing our eyes on Jesus as the one who has actually promised us eternal rest, right? So when I said earlier the idea of resting from work and resting from works, both are important. Resting from doing more, just being busy and feeling like everything is dependent on us, but also looking ahead and knowing that nothing we could ever do could earn God's favor, right? That the corporate gathering, when we get together for church, as a church, is an opportunity for us to find rest in God through coming together. So whether it's Sunday or it's another day, that's a really important thing, a really important aspect of this. But also the idea, and I mentioned this a moment ago, of communicating to our kids and modeling out to our kids that we are not, as parents, that we are not, in fact, God. Mm-hmm. And we act like it all the time. At least I do. That when I say do this or don't do that, what I'm really saying at my worst is, I'm God and you're not, you will obey me because I'm the one laying down the commands. And so for our kids, understanding that when we as a family, setting aside time as a family to worship God together, to just spend time with each other, to enjoy the very good things that God has given us. From something as simple but as incredible as a sunrise to the very next breath in our lungs. None of us provide those things to our kids. None of those things are things that we can provide in and of ourselves. And so go back to your original question, as a stay-at-home mom, that you are making time and making space to observe rest with your kids, maybe not from your kids and separate from that, because that's not always practical, but to invite them into that and to spend time just expressing gratitude to God, for instance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think it also defines rest a little bit differently and better. When I think of rest, I often go to that place of like, oh, I should take a nap or, do something that in my head maybe has a lazy connotation. And so then I avoid it pretty harshly. But I think having the opportunity to invite rest in a very different way with my kids will be something that will be very helpful. And even having the mentality that this will help teach them to learn to rest in a healthy manner in their future.
Well, I really love the difference you made here of an intentional rest.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I think I do default to an escape rest of like, let me zone in and watch this Netflix series and just, I'm going to take a nap. I'm going to go to bed early. I'm going to take a bubble bath. And it's like, oh, this is my rest. But I think that's actually really not what we're talking about here and really missing the key point to like this intentionality of resetting our hearts and resting in who God is and where he has us in our lives. And that's a total mental shift for me, like hearing that.
Yeah, and make no mistake, our physical health is vitally important.
Right.
And it matters to God. So part of implementing a rhythm of rest is to ensure that our bodies can physically recharge, because we can't do anything in perpetuity. We need to sleep. We need to stop moving. But apart from that, or maybe to zoom out from that, just being reminded, I should say, that God is in charge. We are not. And so apart from vegging out or relaxation, which could very easily turn into a form of self-worship. If you're locking the door and just saying, hey, I want everybody to leave me alone, rather we should be saying, and we should be petitioning God to refocus our eyes and our hearts back on him as the one who provides true rest. Hebrews 4 speaks to this, about the eternal rest that we find in Jesus, laying down our drive to do more, to be more, all of our works, and to just find true and eternal rest in him. It is different. It goes deeper. There's a stillness. There is a comfort. There's something beautiful in true Sabbath rest.
So let's like, what does that look like practically for a family? Like, so I'm trying. Okay, so it's not. We talked about what it's not, and so a little bit of, you mentioned like some intentionality of saying like, hey, what can we thank God for? Gratitude there. But what are some practical ways or practical practices that we can start to implement with our family to move towards a healthy place?
You might not like this first one.
Oh,
I don't love it, but
oh boy,
I have three daughters. They're 7, they're 6, and 2. And with the older 2 in particular, what I've found is that, try as I might, I'm often pointing them to Jesus by contrast rather than by comparison. And that's a really tough thing for me to acknowledge. But by acknowledging my own sinful nature and desires, I find that there is a real power and beauty in shepherding my kids through confession, shepherding my kids. By that, I mean me confessing to God and inviting them into that space. So there are times when I'll go to my girls and I'll say, hey, what did I get wrong today in how I disciplined you or in how I spoke to you? And I'll invite them to speak into that, and we'll go to God together. And I'll ask them to pray with me, alongside me, as I ask for God's forgiveness, both vertically with him and then horizontally with them. I think in the same way, the ways that we get rest wrong, the ways that we misunderstand or just completely disregard Sabbath rest, it is, although problematic for sure, a potentially beautiful opportunity to invite our families into a space where we can say as parents, hey kids, mom has gotten this wrong, dad has gotten this wrong. I want you to be hard workers. Work is good. And I want to make sure that I am providing as best I can, but also God is the one who provides. He gives us everything we need. And again, keeping the focus on Jesus and even acknowledging perhaps the ways that you've gotten that wrong. And I think, again, that's a tough thing to do, but it can be a beautiful exercise of pointing our kids to Jesus. And then in that, through that, also taking opportunities and acknowledging it explicitly with our kids. When you maybe physically set down the to-do list, when you stop washing the dishes, when you put this thing or that thing away and you turn to your kids and just say, you know what, there's a lot to do, but God is a good provider. God has provided mom and dad with you all. Let's enjoy this time together. Let's enjoy what God has provided for us and taking that time together. What you're telling your kids is that they are worth it and that God is worth trusting. Because if mom or dad, who hopefully they look up to and they're learning from, if mom or dad can put the to-do list down and make time for them and make clear that God's in charge, he's the one who provides, I just think that could leave an indelible mark on them, particularly if you make a rhythm of it. Again, whenever you do that during the week.
Yeah, and I really like this idea of you might be doing that. So I might say, okay, I'm going to put the dishes down and I'm going to go, outside and I'm going to play with my kids. But I think hearing them or having them hear me say, hey, you know what? I got to do the dishes, but this is more important. This is where I'm going to do my time. It seems like that is a great thing for them to come along with us and do. Or even when you're outside talking about like, okay, we're having a good time in creation. We're hiking, we're swimming. Okay, let's talk about like God created this. We're so thankful for this, and bringing them along in that intentionality. That's good.
Yeah, it is really, really good. It seems like it has to be a balance too, because you do want to model good work ethic and not always put the dishes aside and go do.
The dishes have to get done.
It is, the dishes have to get done, and also wanting to show your kids, like, you can't say you're celebrating the Sabbath because you don't want to clean your room. Trying to model in a balanced way of when things are done and when things aren't, and when to take a break.
But could you have an intentional time where it's like, hey, every Saturday morning, this is our time to do this. Every Sunday afternoon. So maybe it's not like, oh, Monday at 2, you didn't want to do the dishes. But instead it's like, hey, this is our time that we are intentionally blocking for this purpose.
And that brings us to the next question, which is, does it have to be on a Sunday?
The short answer is no. There are reasons that for the church today, it makes sense because we traditionally get together on Sunday for corporate worship. And so it would be really nice, ideal really, to be able to go to church as a family and come home and spend the rest of the day resting and resting it as God intended it. But I'd say first that as now in full-time ministry for about 4 years, and even in the years prior to that, when I was volunteering for, in our church, rest is hard to come by for a lot of folks who are involved in their local body. And in fact, this is another sobering reality. Church can itself become something that is antithetical to true rest, to Sabbath rest, if we let it, where we are trying so hard to make everything just so and giving not just our best effort, but believing that everything depends on us, even in the context of volunteering for church, which is a little bit of a scary thing. So, of course, church doesn't have to be on a Sunday. We know that. We now have a Thursday service, which if you haven't checked out, you really should. It's great. But finding time in the week, it's about rhythm. So go back, Holly, to what you said a moment ago. Your kid doesn't want to clean their room at 2 o'clock on a Monday. Well, that's probably just laziness.
Right.
They're probably trying to weaponize, and I get that that would have been me, by the way, as a little kid. I'm just Sabbathing. But to say it's about rhythm, there's a time for work. And when it's time to work, and you work hard, and you work as unto God, not unto others, but as unto God. And when it's time to rest, you rest. And building that rhythm in. So whether it's a Sunday afternoon or it's a Saturday morning, wherever you find yourself in the week. And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're a first responder, you're in the medical field, or any other number of professions that disrupt your week, where you don't even know what days you're going to be working a week from now, finding a rhythm that may have Sabbath happening on a different day, a Tuesday this week, a Thursday the next. It is really about the heart behind it and finding a rhythm in your week to week to truly rest.
Yeah. I think I know how you're going to answer this question because I feel like it's a little checklisty, the question is. But for those of us, like I'm a working mom, right? So I have, there are a few days that we are all home, but it's also the same time that I'm like, okay, I gotta meal prep. I gotta get this stuff ready for the following week, or else we're all gone throughout the week. And so thinking through, I mean, we know we can move it to a different time, but thinking through how do we balance this idea of, yes, we want to have intentional Sabbath time, but also we need groceries for the week and we need food too. How do we balance that out? Is it, okay, I guess like, I don't even know how to say it right. I guess it's not like it's like where I can be like, check, I Sabbath. I did it for 4 hours. I'm just trying to like, how do I wrestle with that tension?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't think there's any one way to do it, which would be great if we could just prescribe that and then we could hang it up and
That'd
move
be
on to the
helpful.
next thing. Sure. And if you figure that out, let me know. But I do think that framing it the right way is really important. It's foundational. So rather than a mentality of what am I going to lose if I'm taking time to rest, right? I'm losing out on a couple hours or losing out on a day. To understand what we have gained through the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, that he is our hope of eternal rest. We have to think that way. That's a heart posture that will inform even how we make the decision or how we go about getting the groceries, believe it or not. So, not starting the clock and going down legalistic rabbit holes of what you can do, what you can't do, that's dangerous, of course. And it's missing the point. But whatever it looks like in terms of finding those pockets and making sure that, yes, food on the table, things that need to get done are getting done, making sure that we are approaching even those things with an understanding and a heart posture of God being the ultimate provider. That the world doesn't keep turning because you get the groceries. The world keeps turning because God has deemed fit to make it turn. And he's going to keep doing it today and tomorrow and the day, as long as he sees fit. But I would also say, and this is just super practical, that finding ways to continue to be efficient and to organize and to planning is a good and a godly thing. Because if you take opportunities to do that, then hopefully, even amidst the chaos, all the things that you can't plan as a parent, if you can mitigate the unplanned and mitigate the surprises, then it'll help you better protect that Sabbath time for you and your family.
Yeah, that's good. If you've carved out this time and you've worked all the other things around that, that's good.
Yeah, I think I would just say maybe the best way to say it is endeavor to make your Sabbath time for you and your family unassailable. And that means that if it's on a Saturday morning, you're thinking about how to make it unassailable on Monday morning.
Right.
And you're planning to make sure that time is protected.
Yeah.
This might be missing the mark. Is there a way that you can observe the Sabbath? Like Holly did a great example of groceries, which is that's going out and getting groceries. What if you are, I think of Saturday and Sunday things to do, like yard work, like mowing the lawn and weeding and stuff like that. Is there a way to still observe the Sabbath and do those things in the sense of like, we are observing God's creation and loving the things that he has given us and still being good stewards of it? Or is that missing? Am I missing the point?
No, I think it's a great question. I think the question to ask yourself as you think about it for yourself, one person to the next, because the answer may vary, what actually energizes you? Truth be told, I love cutting the grass. I love being outside and tending to our small garden. And those things bring me true joy. And so whenever I say I have to go cut the grass, my wife, Jamie, who has, by the way, a great resource on this that I think we're going to make available on the Sabbath in particular that you can work through with your family. Whenever I say I have to go cut the grass and I make it sound like work, she looks at me with this wry smile because she and I both know it's not really work. That's a great time for me to decompress. I do some of my best thinking and praying and spending time with God when I'm just pushing a lawnmower or when I'm tending to our vegetable garden. And so for some people, that's the last thing they would want to do. It would really and truly be work. For me, it's not. Whatever it is for you, pursue those things and enjoy the opportunity to do those things.
As we wrap up, I think there's just one kind of final thought I want to talk through in a minute. This idea seems very countercultural. So this seems very different than what society is saying as far as do more, be more, you are not enough, and you will only be enough by what you can continue to do. And so I just want to end with this notion of like, why is this so important? And why do we have to constantly fight against what society says to us?
I mean, the current of self-autonomy, of blazing our own trail, of being our own gods, though culture won't often say it that explicitly, that current runs really, really strong for us and for our kids. So fighting against that current takes intentionality. And it won't always be well understood. And so you take something like true rest, taking a true Sabbath, and it is designed for our good and for God's glory. And so when we do that, it is, in fact, good for us, but it also is holding out an example, not just us to our kids, as we've talked about, but also us to a world, an unbelieving world that is mired neck deep in the lie that we have to do more, we have to accomplish more, and that true rest is only found after doing all of the things that we need to do, which, by the way, that mountaintop just keeps getting higher and higher. If you ask anybody, they're never truly done. There's always one more thing to do, one more thing you have to get done. And so it is a powerful witness to a world that desperately needs to hear it and to see it. And another reason why it is good and healthy to engage your kids actively on conversations about rest, true rest, because it won't just be about, oh, we're doing family time necessarily. As they get older and, God willing, they make their faith their own, it might be an incredible opportunity, believe it or not, to have a conversation with a friend, a teenager having a conversation with a friend about, why do you spend that time together on Saturday morning? Do you guys just really love each other that much? What would it say if the response to that was, well, actually, it's because we love God that much, and because we trust Him and we know He provides really good things for us, and we take time every week to enjoy the amazing things that He's given us. And that includes spending time together with our family. Just, it can be an amazing, amazing witness.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I feel like this episode has been so convicting to me in so many different ways. I think there's such a deep-seated insecurity of needing to be so busy to show people that I'm busy, that I'm contributing things and kind of worthy of the things that I'm doing. And so this will be something that I will listen to and go through the resources that you guys have, and then try to do baby steps, because this doesn't seem like it's going to be a flip the switch, easy to do next week and take a Sabbath, because it's a pretty deep-seated need to feel busy. But going to try to do baby steps and go from there.
Yeah. Those resources, since you mentioned them, the resource that Ken mentioned that his wife has, we will drop that on Tuesday, on Resource Tuesday, so you can get that from our Instagram or our Facebook at Parenting for the Everyday. And then in our show notes, we'll put Ken's going to mention a couple other articles that he found helpful, and we'll put those as well for people to reference.
That's right. 2 articles that I found very helpful, both from, actually one from Desiring God. It's called The Most Important Reason We Work. And then a Gospel Coalition article entitled Sabbath Rest is for Busy Moms Too. So.
Yeah. No, this has actually been so good. Like Becca said, it's been very convicting and also even encouraging, I think, for me as a way to move my family and have intentionality. There are some things that we are already doing that we could just wrap up with some intentionality and some really cool conversations. And so, thank you so much for coming on and helping us take something that seems foreign and not applicable and making it really real for us.
Yeah, my pleasure. I would say, as even in trying to plan on how to observe the Sabbath better, step number 1 is going to God and acknowledging who He is, so that we are not trying to self-accomplish our way to observing Sabbath, which is crazy, but it's so deeply ingrained in us. And so just for everybody listening, just to be reminded that true rest, eternal rest, is found in Jesus, His life, His death, His resurrection. We can go to Him, should go to Him. He is a good provider. He has proven that to us, and we can rest in that deeply and fully and finally.
That's really good. That's really good. Perfect way to end it.
Well, thank you for joining us. This has been Parenting for the Everyday. Tune in next time.